Let me tell you about the biggest mistake in galactic zoological history. And trust me, that's saying something, considering the Great Slime Rebellion of 2387 and that incident with the sentient black hole that somehow learned to breakdance. It all started at the Meridian Galactic Zoo, home to the most dangerous, most terrifying, most absolutely should not exist creatures from across the known universe. Think of it as a cosmic collection of everything that evolution decided to give way too many teeth and an attitude problem. The crown jewel of this interstellar house of horrors was the Vorthak. Picture, if you will, a creature that's part dragon, part nightmare, and part really bad life choices made manifest. This thing had terrorized 3 different star systems before they managed to capture it. We're talking about a beast so fierce that entire civilizations would pack up and move to a different galaxy just to avoid being in the same cosmic neighborhood. Standing at roughly the size of a small apartment building, with claws that could slice through reinforced titanium like warm butter, and a roar that could shatter windows from orbit. The Vorthak was the kind of creature that made hardened space marines wet themselves and request immediate transfers to desk jobs. Enter Keeper Zellion, the zoo's director. Picture a 7-foot-tall purple mantis wearing a lab coat and an ego the size of Jupiter. Zellion considered himself the galaxy's foremost expert on dangerous fauna, despite the fact that his previous job was selling insurance on a peaceful agricultural planet where the most dangerous thing was an occasionally grumpy space cow. Now you might wonder how a cosmic monster ended up being babysat by a human. Well, that's where the story gets really stupid. The zoo had recently hired Jake Martinez as part of their new diversity initiative. You see, humans had just joined the Galactic Council, and everyone was still trying to figure out what exactly we were good for. Most species saw us as these adorable little primates who somehow stumbled into space technology, like watching a toddler accidentally build a rocket ship. Jake was supposed to be a janitor. Simple job, really. Mop floors, empty trash cans, try not to get eaten by the exhibits. Standard stuff. On the day everything went sideways, the zoo's main computer system decided to have what could generously be called a complete nervous breakdown. Security protocols were scrambled. Containment fields were flickering like a disco ball having a seizure, and somehow, the work assignment system got its wires crossed. Instead of custodial duty, level 7 restrooms, Jake's tablet cheerfully displayed creature care, Vorthak habitat. Temporary assignment during system maintenance. Meanwhile, Zellion was dealing with an emergency council meeting about the computer malfunction. As he rushed out, he glanced at his duty roster and saw that the Vorthak was covered. He didn't bother checking who was assigned. After all, only the most experienced xenobiologists would be trusted with their prize attraction. Right, wrong, so very catastrophically wrong. But here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy hadn't figured out yet. We have this incredible ability to look at a situation that should absolutely terrify us, and instead think, well, this seems manageable. Jake looked at his assignment, shrugged, and figured he'd go introduce himself to whatever exotic space pet needed looking after. He grabbed his cleaning supplies, a sandwich for lunch, and headed toward the high-security wing, completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to have a very intimate meeting with the galaxy's most feared apex predator. The automatic doors hissed open, and Jake stepped into what was about to become the most expensive babysitting gig in galactic history. Jake walked into the habitat expecting to find maybe a space hamster or one of those cute little creatures that look like a cross between a kitten and a jellyfish. You know, something that would require basic feeding and maybe some light entertainment. What he found instead was a creature that looked like someone had asked a committee of nightmares to design the perfect killing machine, and they had really committed to the project. The Vorthak was currently demolishing what appeared to be a reinforced steel jungle gym that probably cost more than Jake's yearly salary. It moved with the fluid grace of a predator that had never, not once in its entire evolutionary history, been anything other than the thing at the very top of the food chain. Jake stopped dead in his tracks. His brain, bless its little human heart, took about 3 seconds to process what he was looking at. Most rational beings would have used those 3 seconds to turn around and run screaming for the nearest exit, preferably while wetting themselves for good measure. Jake used those 3 seconds to think, wow, that's a big dog. I wish I was kidding. The Vorthak noticed Jake immediately. It slowly turned its massive head, revealing eyes the size of dinner plates that glowed with an intelligence that suggested it was calculating exactly how many bites it would take to finish him off. Its jaw, which could have easily fit a small spacecraft, dropped open to reveal rows of teeth that could make a shark weep with envy. The creature stared at Jake. Jake stared back. The tension in the air was so thick you could have cut it with one of the Vorthak's claws. Then Jake did something that defied every survival instinct that evolution had spent millions of years carefully programming into human DNA. He smiled and said, "Hey there, buddy. What's your name?" The Vorthak blinked, both eyes. Slowly, like a cat that's just been asked to solve calculus. Jake, interpreting this as curiosity rather than the creature deciding which limb to start with, stepped closer. "You're a big guy, aren't you?" "Yes, you are. Look at those teeth. Someone's been taking good care of their dental hygiene." Now here's where things got weird. And by weird I mean the kind of weird that makes xenobiologists quit their jobs and become accountants. The Vorthak tilted its massive head to one side exactly like a confused puppy. Its tail, which was covered in spikes that could puncture battle armor, started to wag. Slowly, tentatively. Like it wasn't quite sure what this new emotion was but thought it might be nice. Jake, being human and therefore incapable of recognizing mortal danger when it's staring him in the face, interpreted this as friendliness. "Oh, you're just lonely, aren't you? When's the last time someone actually talked to you instead of running away screaming?" The creature's response was to make a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a low-frequency rumble that could probably register on seismic equipment. Jake took this as encouragement. "All right, let's see what we're working with here." Jake looked around the habitat, which looked like a tornado had hit a military surplus store. "Someone's been redecorating." "I see. Very abstract. I like the post-apocalyptic chic vibe you've got going." The Vorthak followed Jake's gaze and then looked back at him almost sheepishly. If a creature capable of casual genocide can look sheepish. Jake spotted a mangled security drone in the corner. "What's this? Did you catch this yourself?" He picked up the twisted metal. "Good boy. What a good hunter you are." And that, my friends, is when the galaxy's most feared apex predator started wagging its tail like an overexcited golden retriever. Jake threw the drone debris across the habitat. "Fetch." The Vorthak looked at the debris, looked at Jake, looked back at the debris and then bounded after it with all the terrifying grace of a creature that could level a city block, but all the enthusiasm of a dog who'd just discovered the concept of fetch for the first time. It brought the mangled drone back and dropped it at Jake's feet, then sat down and looked at him expectantly, its massive tail thumping against the ground hard enough to crack the reinforced flooring. "Good boy." Jake patted the creature's massive snout. "Who's a good murder machine?" "Yes, you are. Yes, you are." Somewhere in the monitoring station, security cameras faithfully recorded every moment of this interaction, creating what would eventually become the most watched and most analyzed footage in xenobiological history. They just didn't know it yet. Over the next few hours, Jake did something that would have gotten him committed to a psychiatric facility on any civilized planet. He started treating the Vorthak like a really, really big dog that just happened to be capable of wiping out entire species. "All right, Spike," Jake said. Because of course he gave it a nickname. "Let's work on some basic commands. Sit." The creature, who had apparently decided that Spike was an acceptable name, looked at Jake with what could generously be called confusion. Jake pointed at the ground. "Sit. Like this." He demonstrated by sitting cross-legged on the floor. Spike tilted his massive head, processing this new concept. Then, with the careful deliberation of a creature trying not to accidentally crush its new favorite human, he slowly lowered his bulk to the ground. The impact registered on monitoring equipment 3 floors down. "Good boy. Now stay." Jake held up his hand in the universal stop gesture. Spike froze like a statue. A very large, very deadly statue with glowing eyes. Jake walked across the habitat. Spike's eyes tracked him, but the creature didn't move a muscle. When Jake returned, he was greeted with what could only be described as the most terrifying tail wagging in galactic history. "Excellent. You're a natural at this." Jake scratched behind what he assumed were Spike's ears. They were actually sensory organs capable of detecting prey from 3-star systems away, but Jake didn't know that. And Spike wasn't telling. The real breakthrough came when Jake started working on the "Don't Disintegrate the Tourists" command. This was more challenging, mainly because Spike had never been taught that some things weren't supposed to be disintegrated. Jake set up a mock scenario using maintenance bots. "Okay, Spike. These are guests. We don't eat guests. Guests are friends." Spike examined the bots with the intensity of a creature trying to understand why these small noisy things weren't supposed to be lunch. Jake could practically see the gears turning in that massive head. "Friends," Jake repeated, petting one of the bots. "See. Friends." Spike sniffed the bot delicately, then gently nudged it with his snout. The bot went flying across the habitat and embedded itself in the wall, but hey, it wasn't disintegrated. Progress. The gift-giving started on day 2. Jake arrived to find Spike waiting by the entrance with what looked like a twisted piece of the habitat's climate control system. "Oh, for me. You shouldn't have." Jake accepted the mangled machinery like it was a bouquet of flowers. "This is beautiful, Spike. Really top-quality destruction here." Spike's tail thumped with pride, creating small craters in the floor. The gifts escalated quickly. By the end of the week, Spike was presenting Jake with increasingly impressive pieces of demolished infrastructure. A piece of the reinforced wall here, a chunk of the observation deck there. Jake accepted each offering with the enthusiasm of a parent whose child had just brought them a finger painting. Security's not going to be happy about this, Jake muttered, examining what appeared to be a twisted piece of the facility's main support beam. But look at the craftsmanship, you really put effort into this one. The feeding schedule was Jake's next innovation. Apparently the zoo had been just throwing raw protein at Spike whenever they remembered, which explained why the creature had anger management issues. Everyone needs structure, buddy, Jake explained, setting up regular meal times. Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, just like civilized people. Spike adapted to the schedule with the enthusiasm of someone who had never experienced routine before. He would actually position himself by the feeding area 5 minutes before each meal, like the galaxy's most punctual apocalypse. But the real showstopper was when security footage captured Jake literally riding on Spike's back while cleaning the upper levels of the habitat. Jake had figured out that Spike enjoyed the company, and this was the most efficient way to reach the ceiling-mounted equipment. "Okay, Spike. Left turn," Jake called out, holding his cleaning supplies like a space-age chariot racer. "We need to get those sensors up there." Spike maneuvered with the precision of a creature who had found his purpose in life, being the galaxy's most dangerous cleaning assistant. The other zoo staff watched these interactions with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching someone juggle live grenades while riding a unicycle. Dr. Kelvax, the head xenobiologist, spent so much time staring at the monitors that his assistant started bringing him meals at his desk. "This is impossible," Dr. Kelvax muttered for the 100th time. "Vorthax don't bond. They don't play. They certainly don't perform domestic tasks. Maybe someone should tell the Vorthak that," his assistant replied, watching as Spike carefully moved a piece of equipment so Jake could clean under it. "And what," Dr. Kelvax continued, "is that human doing to make this work?" The answer, as it turned out, was remarkably simple. Jake was treating Spike like a person instead of a monster. He talked to him, established routines, provided positive reinforcement, and gave him a job to do. It was basic psychology, applied to a creature that most people assumed was too alien to understand. But Jake didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. So he just kept doing it. By the end of the first week, Spike had gone from the terror of the galaxy to something that looked suspiciously like a really big, really dangerous pet. He had learned 17 different commands, mastered the art of gentle gift-giving, and had apparently appointed himself as Jake's personal bodyguard and cleaning assistant. The transformation was so complete that when Jake took his first lunch break, something unprecedented happened. Spike noticed his human was gone, and he was not okay with this development. Not okay at all. Keeper Zellian chose the absolute worst possible moment to return from his extended emergency council sessions. He strutted into the zoo's main control center with the confidence of someone who had just spent 3 days explaining to bureaucrats why his facility was the crown jewel of galactic entertainment, completely unaware that his crown jewel had undergone a personality transplant. "Status report," he barked at Dr. Kelvax, who was still glued to the monitoring station like it was showing the galaxy's most addictive soap opera. "Well, sir," Dr. Kelvax began, not quite sure how to explain what he'd been witnessing, "the Vorthax situation has evolved." "Evolved?" Zellian waved a dismissive appendage. "What could possibly evolve? It's a simple predator. It eats, it sleeps, it terrifies visitors. Basic animal behavior." Dr. Kelvax wordlessly turned the main monitor to face his boss. On screen, Jake was teaching Spike to play what appeared to be an improvised game of soccer using a piece of demolished equipment as a ball. Zellian stared at the screen. His compound eyes widened to approximately the size of dinner plates. His mandibles clicked in the kind of rapid staccato pattern that indicated severe psychological distress. "What," he said very slowly, "is that human doing in the Vorthak habitat?" "Playing soccer, sir. Yesterday it was hide and seek. The day before they worked on what the human calls proper table manners." "Table manners." Zellian's voice had risen to a pitch that was making nearby equipment vibrate. "It's a Vorthak. It doesn't eat at tables. It eats the tables, and everything around them, including the people who were using them." "Yes, sir. That's what we thought too." On the monitor, Jake threw his arms up in celebration as Spike successfully nudged the makeshift ball through 2 pieces of debris that were apparently serving as goalposts. The creature's tail was wagging so enthusiastically that it was creating small earthquakes. "How long has this been going on?" Zellian demanded. "About a week, sir. Ever since the human was assigned to creature care during the system malfunction." "Assigned to creature care." Zellian's voice cracked. "He's a janitor. He mops floors. He empties trash cans. He doesn't domesticate apex predators. Apparently he does, sir. Zelian was about to launch into a tirade that would have been heard in 3 adjacent star systems when the real crisis began. Jake, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the control room, checked his watch and realized it was lunchtime. All right, Spike. I'm going to grab a sandwich. You be good while I'm gone, okay? Jake patted the creature's massive snout. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Spike made his usual rumbling purr sound and settled down to wait. Jake grabbed his lunch and headed for the exit. That's when everything went sideways faster than a drunk pilot in an asteroid field. The moment Jake disappeared from Spike's sight, the creature's demeanor changed completely. The contentment vanished, replaced by something that can only be described as separation anxiety on a planetary scale. Spike stood up and began pacing around the habitat, making a sound that was part whine, part roar, and part something that registered on equipment designed to detect tectonic activity. He went to the spot where Jake usually stood, sniffed around frantically, then looked toward the exit with an expression of growing panic. "Sir," Dr. Kelvax said, his voice tight with the kind of concern usually reserved for imminent galactic catastrophes. "I think we have a problem." On the monitors, Spike was now actively searching every corner of his habitat, his movements becoming increasingly agitated. The whining sounds he was making were getting louder and more distressed. Equipment throughout the facility began picking up the vibrations. "He's looking for the human," Dr. Kelvax observed, with the sort of scientific detachment that comes from watching your entire understanding of xenobiology get thrown out the nearest airlock. "Well, where is the human?" Zelian snapped. "Break room, sir, having lunch." "Then get him back here immediately." "I tried calling, sir. He's not answering his communicator." That's when Spike apparently decided that if Jake wasn't coming back, he would go find Jake himself. The first indication that this was happening was when every alarm in the facility started going off at once. The second indication was when the reinforced containment barriers that had been designed to hold creatures capable of destroying small moons began to buckle under sustained assault. "Containment breach in Sector 7. The facility's AI announced with the kind of calm that only artificial intelligences can maintain while announcing the end of the world. Vorthak containment compromised. Initiating emergency protocols." On the monitors, they watched Spike systematically demolish everything between him and the exit. But here's the thing that made this crisis different from every other monster rampage in galactic history. Spike wasn't destroying things out of rage or bloodlust. He was destroying them because they were in his way, and he needed to find his human. "Why isn't he going on a killing spree?" Zelian demanded, watching as Spike carefully stepped over a group of maintenance workers who had wisely decided to play dead. "Vorthaks don't show restraint. They don't avoid casualties. They certainly don't look worried." "I think he's trying not to hurt anyone, sir," Dr. Kelvax said, his voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for witnessing the birth of stars. "Look at how he's moving. He's being careful." Spike had indeed broken out of his habitat, but instead of the massacre everyone expected, he was methodically searching the facility. He would stick his massive head into rooms, look around, make his distressed whining sound, and move on. When he encountered staff members, he would sniff them briefly and then ignore them completely, apparently recognizing that they weren't the human he was looking for. The emergency protocols that kicked in were designed for a rampaging monster, not a lovesick apex predator having an emotional crisis. Blast doors slammed shut, cutting off sections of the facility. Security teams mobilized with weapons that could theoretically stop a small army. Evacuation alarms blared. None of it mattered. Spike tore through blast doors like they were made of tissue paper, ignored the security teams completely, and seemed utterly indifferent to the evacuation alarms. He had one mission: find Jake. The search led him through the main visitor areas, where tourists got the shock of their lives as a creature from their worst nightmares came thundering past, completely ignoring them in favor of sniffing around looking lost and upset. "He's heading for the administrative section," Dr. Kelvax reported, tracking Spike's progress on the facility map. "At this rate, he'll reach the break room in approximately 3 minutes. Can't we just tell the human to come back?" Zelian asked, his voice reaching new octaves of panic. "Still not answering his communicator, sir. I think he left it in the locker room." That's when they heard it. Even through the reinforced walls of the control room, they could hear Spike's calls getting closer. The sound was heartbreaking, a creature of unimaginable power reduced to crying for someone who had shown him kindness. Finally, Spike's massive head appeared outside the break room window. Jake, who had been peacefully eating a peanut butter sandwich while reading a magazine about hovercar maintenance, looked up to see two glowing eyes the size of dinner plates staring at him through the reinforced glass. "Oh hey buddy," Jake said, completely unfazed by the fact that his cosmic pet had just torn through half the facility to find him. "Miss me?" Spike's response was to make the most pathetic whining sound ever recorded, pressing his snout against the window like a dog who'd been left alone too long. Jake looked around the break room, which was shaking from Spike's presence, and made a decision that probably saved several insurance companies from bankruptcy. He opened the window. "Come here, you big baby," Jake said, reaching out to scratch Spike's snout. "I was only gone for 20 minutes. The moment Jake made contact, Spike calmed down completely. The earth-shaking rumble stopped. The distressed whining ceased. The galaxy's most feared predator, essentially melted with relief. In the control room, Zelian and Dr. Kelvax watched this interaction with the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for witnessing miracles. "Sir," Dr. Kelvax said finally, "I think we need to have a conversation with the human." The march to the break room was a sight to behold. Keeper Zelian strode through the facility's corridors with the righteous fury of someone whose entire worldview had just been demolished by a janitor and a domesticated apocalypse. Dr. Kelvax followed behind, frantically taking notes on a tablet while trying to keep up with his boss's angry pace. They had to navigate around the spike-shaped holes in 3 blast doors, step over scattered debris from the impromptu facility renovation, and dodge maintenance crews who were already starting the lengthy process of explaining to insurance adjusters why their monster-proof containment system now looked like it had been redecorated by a cosmic blender. 30 years, Zelian muttered as they walked, his mandibles clicking with each word. 30 years I've been studying dangerous fauna. I have 17 advanced degrees in xenobiology. I've written 43 papers on predator psychology. And some human with a mop bucket waltzes in here and turns the galaxy's most feared creature into a house pet. To be fair, sir, Dr. Kelvax ventured, the human does seem to have a natural talent for natural talent. Zelian's voice hit a pitch that made nearby equipment vibrate. It's a janitor. The most dangerous thing janitors are supposed to handle is a clogged drain. Not apex predators with separation anxiety. They reached the break room to find Jake sitting cross-legged on the floor, with Spike's massive head resting in his lap. Jake was scratching behind the creature's sensory organs while Spike made contented rumbling sounds that were probably registering on seismic equipment 3 floors down. "Jake Martinez," Zelian announced, his voice carrying the full weight of bureaucratic authority. "We need to talk." Jake looked up, still absently petting Spike. "Oh hey there, you must be my boss. Sorry about the mess. Spike here got a little worried when I went to lunch." "Didn't you, buddy?" Spike's response was to nuzzle Jake's hand and make a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a small earthquake. "Worried?" Zelian's compound eyes bulged. "It destroyed half the facility. It breached containment. It caused a facility-wide emergency evacuation. Yeah, he's got some attachment issues," Jake said, as if discussing a slightly neurotic house cat rather than a creature capable of casual genocide. "But look, he didn't actually hurt anyone, did he? He was just looking for me." "That's not the point," Zelian sputtered. "The point is that this creature is supposed to be the crown jewel of our collection, a terrifying predator that strikes fear into the hearts of visitors from across the galaxy. Not whatever this is. What this is," Jake replied, giving Spike another scratch, "is a really big guy who was probably just lonely. Right, Spike?" Spike's tail thumped against the floor with enough force to crack the reinforced tiles. "Lonely?" Zelian's voice had reached frequencies that were making the windows vibrate. "It's a vorthak. They don't get lonely. They don't form attachments. They're solitary apex predators." "Says who?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. Says the scientific literature. Says decades of research. Says every xenobiologist in the galaxy." Jake considered this. Well, did any of those xenobiologists ever actually try talking to one? The question hung in the air like a cosmic anvil. Zelian's mandibles clicked frantically as he processed the implications. That's not how xenobiology works," he said finally. "You don't just talk to dangerous predators. You study them. You observe them. You maintain safe distances and controlled environments. But you don't actually interact with them as individuals," Jake said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Kelvax, who had been quietly recording this entire exchange, looked up from his tablet. "Actually, sir," He has a point. Most of our research has been based on observational data from captured specimens in high-stress environments. We've never actually attempted socialization protocols. Socialization protocols. Zelian turned on his assistant. They're not pets, Kelvax. They're not meant to be socialized. Says who? Jake repeated. I mean, Spike here is pretty social. Aren't you, buddy? On cue, Spike lifted his massive head and looked directly at Zelian. It wasn't a threatening look, exactly, but it was the kind of look that suggested the creature was paying very close attention to this conversation and forming opinions about the participants. Zelian took an involuntary step backward. This is ridiculous. You've compromised our most valuable exhibit. The Vorthak is supposed to be fierce, untamable, terrifying. How are we supposed to attract visitors to see a creature that acts like an oversized house pet? I don't know, Jake said. Maybe people would be more interested in seeing something amazing rather than something terrifying. Amazing? Zelian's voice cracked. What's amazing about a domesticated predator? Jake stood up, which caused Spike to immediately shift position to stay close to his human. You want to know what's amazing? The fact that this guy, who everyone said was nothing but a mindless killing machine, is actually incredibly intelligent. He learns commands faster than any dog I've ever seen. He's gentle when he needs to be, protective when he should be, and loyal to a fault. Spike, as if understanding the praise, sat up straighter and made a sound that was clearly pleased. He's got personality, feelings, preferences. He likes routine. He enjoys having a job to do. He gets excited about games and proud when he does something well. He even has a sense of humor. Sense of humor? Dr. Kelvax asked, looking up from his frantic note-taking. Oh yeah. Yesterday he hid behind the climate control unit and jumped out to surprise me. Scared the hell out of me, and he thought it was hilarious. Spike's tail thumped at the memory, and he made a sound that could only be described as chuckling. This is insane, Zelian muttered. Absolutely insane. Maybe, Jake said. But it's also pretty incredible. I mean, think about it. You've got a creature here that's been misunderstood for who knows how long. Everyone just assumed he was a monster because he looked scary and acted out when he was scared or lonely. But give him some attention, some structure, some purpose, and look what happens. Zelian stared at Jake, then at Spike, then back at Jake. You're suggesting that our entire approach to dangerous fauna has been wrong. I'm suggesting that maybe some of what we call dangerous is just misunderstood, Jake replied. I mean, Spike here hasn't shown any aggression toward anyone who wasn't threatening him, or keeping him from something he wanted. That's not mindless violence. That's pretty reasonable behavior, actually. Reasonable behavior. Zelian's voice had reached a pitch that was making small objects vibrate. It demolished containment barriers designed to hold creatures capable of destroying planets. Because he wanted to find me, Jake said, patiently. If someone locked you in a room and kept you from your best friend, wouldn't you try to break out? Spike chose this moment to demonstrate his loyalty by positioning himself between Jake and Zelian. It wasn't an aggressive posture, but it was definitely a protective one. The message was clear. Jake was under Spike's protection, and anyone who upset Jake would have to deal with Spike. Zelian looked at the creature, then at Jake, then at the massive amount of facility damage visible through the break room window. His shoulders sagged as the full implications of the situation hit him. You realize, he said slowly, that I can't have a janitor running around domesticating apex predators. It's against every safety protocol in the book. Then maybe, Jake said, you need to rewrite the book. I can't just actually, sir, Dr. Kelvax interrupted. There might be a solution. Both Jake and Zelian turned to look at the assistant, who was practically vibrating with excitement. The human has demonstrated unprecedented success in what we could call interspecies behavioral modification. We could reclassify him as a specialist consultant. Create a new position. Senior interspecies relations coordinator perhaps. You want to promote the janitor? Zelian asked faintly. I want to promote the only person in galactic history who has successfully domesticated a Vorthak, Dr. Kelvax replied. Think about the research opportunities, the potential applications, the pure scientific value of what he's accomplished. Jake looked down at Spike, who was watching this conversation with the kind of intelligent attention that suggested he understood more than anyone had given him credit for. What do you think, buddy? Jake asked. Want to keep working together? Spike's response was to gently nuzzle Jake's hand, then look directly at Zelian with an expression that clearly said, you'd better say yes. or we're going to have a problem. Zellion looked at the creature, looked at the destruction visible through the window, looked at Jake, and made the kind of decision that separates good administrators from great ones. Fine, he said, but you're getting the biggest insurance premium increase in galactic history added to your personnel file. 6 months later, the Meridian Galactic Zoo had become the most popular tourist destination in 3 sectors, and Jake Martinez had somehow become the most famous human in the galaxy without actually trying. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after Jake's promotion to senior interspecies relations specialist had been, to put it mildly, chaotic. The insurance investigators alone had taken a month to process the claims from Spike's great breakroom adventure, and the paperwork involved in reclassifying a Vorthak from apex predator maintained distance to domesticated, requires human supervision had nearly caused a bureaucratic revolution. But the results spoke for themselves. The zoo's attendance had increased by 400%. Tour groups would arrive daily, not to see terrifying monsters cowering behind energy barriers, but to witness something that had never been seen before in galactic history: interspecies cooperation on a level that defied every scientific understanding of predator behavior. Jake's morning routine had evolved into the galaxy's most popular live stream. Every day at precisely 9 a.m. Galactic Standard Time, millions of beings across hundreds of worlds would tune in to watch Breakfast with Spike and Jake. "Good morning, everyone," Jake would say to the cameras while Spike performed his morning stretches behind him. And yes, Jake had taught a cosmic apex predator to do yoga. Because of course he had. Today we're going to work on Spike's table manners, and later we'll be introducing him to our newest resident. The newest residents were the real story. Word had spread through the galactic zoological community about Jake's success with Spike, and suddenly the Meridian Zoo was receiving requests from facilities across the galaxy. Creatures that had been deemed impossible to handle were being shipped in for Jake's special attention. There was Fluffy, a crystalline entity from the Andromeda sector that had been dissolving everything it touched until Jake figured out it was just trying to communicate through chemical reactions. Now Fluffy spent its days creating beautiful light shows for visitors and had learned to write its name in 17 different languages using controlled mineral emissions. Then there was Chompers, a plant-based life form that had been eating maintenance crews until Jake realized it was simply malnourished and had been trying to ask for proper fertilizer. These days, Chompers helped with the zoo's landscaping and had developed what could only be described as a green thumb despite not actually having thumbs. The crown jewel of Jake's expanding menagerie was Princess, a creature from the outer rim that looked like someone had crossed a spider with a nebula and given it anger management issues. Princess had been responsible for the destruction of 3 separate research stations before Jake discovered that she was actually an artist who had been frustrated by the lack of proper creative outlets. Now she wove energy patterns that were so beautiful they'd been featured in galleries across the core worlds. But Spike remained Jake's favorite, and the feeling was clearly mutual. "Alright buddy," Jake announced to both Spike and their live audience of several million beings, "let's show everyone what we've been working on." Spike's performance had evolved far beyond simple tricks. The creature had learned to interact with tour groups, carefully controlling his strength and intimidation factor to provide exactly the right level of excitement without actual terror. He could gauge his audience perfectly, giving small children gentle head pats while providing adults with more dramatic displays of his abilities. "Today's group is from the Centauri Educational Collective," Jake explained to Spike, who was listening with the kind of focused attention that most people reserve for important business meetings. "Lots of younglings, so we're going with the gentle giant approach." Spike nodded, actually nodded. Dr. Kelvax had stopped trying to explain how a creature with Spike's neural structure could understand complex social dynamics and had instead just started documenting everything for what was sure to be the most comprehensive xenobiological study in galactic history. The tour group arrived right on schedule, a collection of various species children and their very nervous chaperones. The adults hung back near the exits, ready to run at the first sign of trouble, while the younglings pressed against the observation barriers with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Good morning everyone," Jake called out. "I'd like you to meet my friend Spike. Spike, can you say hello to our visitors?" Spike approached the barrier and carefully lowered his massive head to child level. He made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a gentle rumble, the kind of sound that said hello in a voice that was designed to be non-threatening. A young Altarian in the front row pressed her tiny hand against the barrier. Spike gently touched his snout to the spot where her hand was, separated only by the transparent aluminum that was now there more for crowd control than actual safety. "He's not scary at all," the youngling announced with the profound wisdom that only children possess. "He's just really big." "That's right," Jake said. Spike here used to seem scary because people didn't understand him. But once we got to know each other, we figured out that what he really wanted was a friend and something interesting to do. What kind of interesting things? Asked a young Terran boy, his eyes wide with fascination. Well, Jake said, Spike here is actually an excellent problem solver. Spike, show them the puzzle box. One of the zoo staff wheeled out a complex mechanical puzzle that would have challenged most graduate-level engineers. Spike examined it carefully, then began manipulating the various components with a delicacy that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. Within minutes, he had solved the puzzle and was looking around for approval. The crowd burst into applause, and Spike's tail wagged with enough enthusiasm to register on seismic equipment. But here's the really amazing part, Jake continued. Spike doesn't just solve puzzles for himself, he's learned to help others too. Spike, remember when Princess was having trouble with her new art project? Spike's response was to move to a section of the habitat where a complex energy sculpture was displayed. The sculpture was beautiful, all flowing lines and shifting colors, but in one corner there was a small imperfection where the energy patterns didn't quite match. Spike carefully positioned himself near the sculpture and made a series of small adjustments to the containment field generators. The energy patterns shifted, the imperfection disappeared, and the sculpture became even more beautiful than before. He figured out how to help Princess fix her art, Jake explained. That's not just intelligence, that's empathy. He saw that his friend was frustrated and found a way to help. The tour group was silent for a moment, processing the implications of what they'd just witnessed. Finally, one of the adult chaperones spoke up. You mean, she said slowly, that this creature is capable of friendship with multiple species? Not just capable, Jake replied. He actively seeks it out. Most of what we call aggressive behavior in creatures like Spike is actually just loneliness or frustration. Give them social interaction, mental stimulation, and a sense of purpose, and they become completely different beings. Dr. Kelvax, who was observing from the control room, made another note on his ever-growing list of behavioral observations. His research based on Jake's work was revolutionizing the field of xenobiology and had already led to successful rehabilitations of dozens of previously impossible creatures. Keeper Zellian, who had initially been horrified by Jake's methods, now spent most of his time fielding requests from zoos, research facilities, and even military organizations across the galaxy who wanted to hire Jake as a consultant. The waiting list for Jake's services was currently 3 years long and growing. The real question, Zellian had said in a recent interview with Galactic Scientific Monthly, isn't how Jake does what he does. The question is why it took us so long to try his approach. He treats these creatures like individuals rather than specimens, and the results speak for themselves. As the tour group prepared to leave, the young Altarian, who had been the first to interact with Spike, raised her hand. Mr. Jake, she said, can anyone learn to do what you do? Jake considered the question seriously. I think, he said finally, that anyone can learn to see past the scary exterior to the individual underneath. It just takes patience, empathy, and the willingness to accept that maybe what you think you know isn't the whole story. But mostly, he added with a grin, it takes remembering that everyone, no matter how different they look, just wants to be understood and appreciated for who they really are. Spike chose that moment to demonstrate his agreement by gently nuzzling Jake's shoulder, causing a collective awe from the tour group that was probably heard 3 sectors away. As the visitors filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd seen, Jake settled down for his afternoon routine with Spike. They had 3 new arrivals coming in next week, all creatures that had been deemed impossible to handle by their previous facilities. What do you think, buddy? Jake asked, scratching behind Spike's sensory organs. Ready to help some more friends figure out how to fit in? Spike's response was a contented rumble that translated roughly to bring it on. And somewhere in the administrative offices, Keeper Zellian was reviewing the quarterly reports and marveling at the fact that the most successful period in his zoo's history had been started by a human janitor who had approached a cosmic apex predator and said, "Hey buddy, what's your name?" The galaxy, it turned out, was full of misunderstood monsters just waiting for someone to see past the teeth and claws to the individual underneath. And somehow, humans had turned out to be exceptionally good at that particular skill. Who knew that the most dangerous species in the galaxy would turn out to be the ones who could turn any creature into a friend? The insurance companies were still trying to figure out how to classify that particular risk factor.